The Life of Minerva McGonagall from Harry Potter. Professor Minerva McGonagall, Order of Merlin First Class, born October 4th, was a Scottish half-blood witch, the only daughter of Muggle Robert McGonagall and witch Isobel Ross. She was also the older sister of Malcolm and Robert Jr. Minerva, attended Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and was sorted into Gryffindor House. But it took the sorting hat 5.5 minutes to decide if she was Gryffindor or Ravenclaw, which made her a Hatstall. During her 7th year, she was appointed head girl. After her education, Minerva worked for 2 years at the Ministry of Magic and later returned to Hogwarts, where she became head of Gryffindor House and the Transfiguration professor. Though she wasn't a member of the Order of the Phoenix during the First Wizarding War, Minerva greatly helped the Ministry of Magic's resistance through spying on Death Eaters and bringing the Aurors crucial information on their activities. Eventually, Minerva became, concurrently at differing times, Deputy Headmistress and Headmistress of Hogwarts. In 1995, she opposed Dolores Umbridge, the High Inquisitor of Hogwarts. She also protected the students from Alecto and Amycus Carrow from 1997 until 1998. As part of the Order of the Phoenix's new resistance movement, Minerva fought in several battles of both wars, including the Battle of Astronomy Tower and the Battle of Hogwarts, where she led the resistance against Lord Voldemort. Minerva survived the Second Wizarding War and became headmistress full-time, a title she held onto into the early 2020s. Welcome to the Imagi. In today's video, we're going over the life of Minerva McGonagall. Before we begin, we publish a new video every day, so if you subscribe right now, your phone will always be at full charge when you need it, and you'll never run out of room for photos. The Imagi's reach stretches beyond this channel, so if you're a fan of us, please consider subscribing to our other channels and following us on all of our social media. Help us reach our goal of passing 100,000 followers on all of our accounts by the end of the year. Early life. Minerva McGonagall was born on the 4th of October to Robert McGonagall, a Muggle Presbyterian minister, and his wife Isobel Ross, a witch. She was the couple's first child and was named after her mother's grandmother, a very powerful witch. By then, her parents lived on the outskirts of Caithness in the Scottish Highlands, in a village where mostly Muggles lived. Her birth proved to be both a joy and a crisis. Isobel had given up her use of magic for her love of Robert and never told him about her nature as she was afraid to mar the bliss of their wedding. However, the infant Minerva displayed small but noticeable signs of magic from her earliest hours. She had no control over her magic and thus inadvertently summoned toys that had been left on upper shelves to her cot, made her family cat do her bidding, and would cause her father's bagpipes to play themselves, which would cause her to chuckle happily. Thus, Isobel often secluded herself with Minerva for days at a time. She knew that she must confess to her husband about their daughter's wizarding abilities, and so she finally did, explaining everything to Robert and telling him that they were bound by the International Statute of Secrecy, and they must conceal the truth about their magical abilities for their safety. The two parents remained together despite the shocking revelation, but their trust was never the same, much to the sadness of their perceptive daughter. She later had 2 brothers, Malcolm and Robert Jr., who revealed magical ability in due course. As a child, Minerva helped her mother conceal from her father the accidents and embarrassments the young witch's magic sometimes caused. She was very close to her Muggle father, whom in temperament she resembled more than her mother. On Minerva's 11th birthday, she received her admittance letter from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, at the time headed by Professor Armando Dippet. Before coming to the school, she visited Diagon Alley and purchased her wand from Ollivander's wand shop. The wand she selected was an unusual specimen, 9.5 inches, fur and dragon heartstring. Now free to be with her kind and to exercise her talents, Minerva saw how her mother sobbed that day, not only out of pride, but also out of envy. Hogwarts years. At the age of 11, Minerva attended Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Minerva was quickly recognized as the most outstanding student of her year with a particular talent for Transfiguration. By the end of her education at Hogwarts, she had achieved an impressive record. Top grades in Owls and Newts, Prefect, Head Girl, and the winner of the Transfiguration Today Most Promising Newcomer Award. Under the guidance of her inspirational Transfiguration teacher, Albus Dumbledore, Minerva had managed to become an animagus. Her animal form, with its distinctive markings, tabby cat, square spectacles markings around her eyes, were duly logged in the Ministry of Magic's Animagus registry. Minerva played for the Gryffindor Quidditch team in her student years, in which she proved to be gifted. However, she suffered a nasty fall in her final year, a foul during the Gryffindor vs Slytherin match, which would decide the Quidditch Cup winner. This event left her with a concussion, several broken ribs, and a lifelong desire to see Slytherin crushed on the Quidditch pitch. Early heartbreak. After graduating from Hogwarts, Minerva was offered a position at the Department of Magical Law Enforcement of the British Ministry of Magic. She returned to her family's manse to spend one last summer with her family before moving to London. During these months, an 18-year-old Minerva met Dougal McGregor, a local muggle who was the handsome, clever, and funny son of a local farmer. The two shared a sense of humor, argued fiercely, and suspected mysterious depths in the other. Minerva fell head over heels in love with McGregor, being the first and only time in her life that she might have been said to lose her head. Eventually, McGregor proposed to Minerva on a plowed field and she accepted his offer. That night, however, Minerva was unable to tell her parents of the engagement. Thinking about her future, she realized that wedding a muggle who didn't know that she was a witch would mean Minerva would follow in her mother's footsteps and live unhappily with her wand locked away, shredding all of her ambitions. The next morning, Minerva went to tell McGregor that she had changed her mind and she could not marry him, aware that if she broke the international statute of secrecy and told him why, she would lose the job at the ministry, for which she was giving him up. She could give him no good reason for her change of heart, leaving McGregor devastated and left for London 3 days later. These months proved to be some of the most difficult of Minerva's life. Early career at Hogwarts, 1910s to 1945. Though her feelings for the Ministry of Magic were affected by the fact that she had recently suffered an emotional crisis, Minerva didn't much enjoy her home in London and workplace, where some of her co-workers had an ingrained anti-Muggle basis. Given her adoration of her Muggle father and her continuing love for Dougal, she deplored these ideas. Despite this, Minerva was among the most efficient, gifted employees in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and became fond of her much older boss, Elphinstone Urquhart. After 2 years at the ministry, she was offered a prestigious promotion, yet found herself turning it down as she missed her home in Scotland. Instead, Minerva sent an owl to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, asking whether she might be considered for a teaching post. The owl returned within hours, offering her a job in the Transfiguration department, under Head of Department Albus Dumbledore. Through her efforts and work, Minerva proved to be a strict yet inspirational teacher, maintaining control of her students with a stern hand that made her someone not to be crossed. By this time, Minerva was shocked to learn from her oblivious mother, in the middle of a chatty letter of local news, that Dougal had married the daughter of another farmer. Albus discovered his former student and colleague in tears in her classroom late that evening, and she confessed the whole story to him. He offered both comfort and told Minerva some of his own family history, previously unknown to her. The confidences exchanged that night between them were to form the basis of a lasting friendship. Sometime in the 1910s, among her first students were Newt Scamander and Letta Lestrange, the latter of whom was frequently in trouble with Minerva for magically retaliating against vicious gossip about her half-brother's death by hexing her peers. A notable example of this is when Letta sealed the mouth of a fellow student shut during her 3rd year, after the girl had been speaking ill of her behind her back. Minerva was called upon to fix the situation, but Letta ran from her and Minerva was forced to chase her around the school, all while docking points. When she couldn't find her, Minerva removed the spell from the girl but promptly restored it with an irritated "wisht" when the girl continued to badmouth Letta. Global Wizarding War, 1927 to 1945. During Gellert Grindelwald's rise to power in 1927, Minerva stayed a close confidant to Dumbledore. She was quite critical of the Ministry of Magic's involvement at Hogwarts and was furious when Torquil Travers and a team of Aurors interrupted Dumbledore's defense against the dark arts lesson, protesting that this was a school. However, her protests fell on deaf ears and she was forced to escort the students from the classroom. In 1932, Minerva went to the Hogshead Inn and alerted Albus to Anton Vogel's decision to absolve Grindelwald's crimes. After Dumbledore's first army returned to Hogwarts from their first missions, Minerva watched them in the Great Hall, while Albus showed the rest a sculpture of the Eyrie where they were headed. Proposal and Head of Transfiguration, 1950s to 1970. Minerva remained close friends with her former boss in the ministry, Elphinstone. During a visit sometime between 1956 and the 1980s, he proposed marriage to Minerva at Madame Puddifoot's tea shop. Surprised, embarrassed, and still in love with Dougal, she declined. However, the two remained in contact for years. Later on in her career, Minerva rose to the position of head of the Transfiguration department. Furthermore, Minerva was appointed the position of Head of Gryffindor House, the house in which she used to reside while studying at Hogwarts. After he became headmaster, Dumbledore would, later on in his career, also trust her enough to allow her to become deputy headmistress of the school and fill in for him on the occasions of his absence. First Wizarding War, 1970 to 1981. After the first rise of Dark Wizard Lord Voldemort, Minerva took part in fighting back against Lord Voldemort and his Death Eaters, though she still taught at Hogwarts during the First Wizarding War. Previously, she was suspicious of Riddle in spite of the fact that she wasn't his teacher and thus shared her fears with Dumbledore in private. Even so, McGonagall chose not to join the Order of the Phoenix, which was seen as a renegade outfit by the Ministry at the time. Instead, unbeknownst to her students, she spent many nights spying on them under the guise of a tabby cat, bringing the Aurors critical information on the activities of Voldemort's followers. Despite her involvement in the Ministry's efforts to contain the threat of the Dark Lord's rise to power, Minerva got through the war unscathed. However, she suffered personal bereavements, the loss of her brother Robert, two of her favorite students, Lily Evans and James Potter, and of Dougal McGregor, who was murdered in a random anti-Muggle attack by the Death Eaters, along with his wife and children. This last news was a terrible blow to Minerva, who wondered if she would have been able to save him if she'd married him. Concurrently, as the war raged outside of castle walls, the school was plagued by a series of curses inadvertently unleashed by one of the students, Jacob, who began to meddle with the 5 fabled cursed vaults. Like the rest of the faculty, Professor McGonagall did everything she could to protect the students, although they were ultimately unable to prevent the injury of several students and the death of a Slytherin student named Duncan Ashe. This all led to Jacob's expulsion. Protection of Harry Potter. In 1981, baby Harry Potter defeated Lord Voldemort in his family home at Godric's Hollow, after his parents James and Lily Potter, both members of the Order of the Phoenix, were murdered whilst protecting their son from harm. The fall of Voldemort ultimately ended the war, and his followers were arrested, and those that escaped went into hiding. Minerva traveled to Surrey and spent an entire day observing the Dursley family, seeing whether or not they met the standards of looking after Harry, as they were his only living relatives with his parents now dead. What she saw horrified her. The Dursleys couldn't have been any less like Lily and James if they had tried. She was thus present along with Rubus Hagrid when Dumbledore placed Harry on the Dursleys' doorstep, despite her objections of leaving him with these muggles, whom she considered to be the worst kind of them. She kept a close eye on Harry from time to time during his early childhood, as did the members of the Order of the Phoenix. Between the wars, 1981 to 1995. After the First Wizarding War had ended, Minerva continued on with her career at Hogwarts, carrying on teaching the art of Transfiguration. Elphinstone, who had never ceased to love her, proposed every now and then until she finally accepted after Dougal's death. Their engagement happened during a summertime stroll around the lake in the Hogwarts grounds. The retired Elphinstone bought a small cottage for the two of them in Hogsmeade, whence Minerva could travel easily to work every day. Although the couple had no children, her nieces and nephews visited often. This was a period of great fulfillment for Minerva. In 1985, 3 years into their marriage, Elphinstone died from a venomous tentacula bite. Minerva, who couldn't bear to remain alone in their cottage, packed her things after her husband's funeral and returned to her first-floor study in Hogwarts Castle. It's unknown whether she still owns the cottage. Always a brave and private person, Minerva poured all of her energies into her work, and few people, except perhaps Albus, ever realized how much she suffered. During the second year of Jacob's sibling, when Ben Copper went missing, she first asked if Jacob's sibling had seen him in the Hogwarts Express, and if he had been acting strange. And after learning that they didn't, but Penny Haywood did, and Ben seemed fine even though he was always a bit odd, she mentioned that the cursed ice may have changed Ben, and slightly chastised Jacob's sibling for their attempt to enter the cursed vault, asking them if they had learnt anything that said of a threat beyond the door, and appealed to them that this involved all of Hogwarts, not just Jacob. Learning that they had found and read a message about an ice knight and vanished stairs, Minerva said she would discuss this with Dumbledore, and accidentally revealed that she and the other teachers had once dealt with the cursed ice, which she quickly covered by telling Jacob's sibling that he is free to help in the search of Ben, and asked him to tell her personally should he succeed, promising a reward. McGonagall and Snape eventually found the missing Ben Copper encased in cursed ice, and Jacob's sibling and Rowan realized they knew more about the cursed ice than she revealed. Minerva was perplexed that the knockback jinx had no effect on the ice, noting how no one could use it to shatter the ice, even more so when Snape callously suggested they use incendio to melt it while also burning him to death, as she realized from how the cursed ice had began to expand throughout the school that someone had been tampering with the vaults. Ignoring Snape's frustrated questioning of Dumbledore's whereabouts, Minerva and Snape used the fire-making spell to successfully free Ben from the cursed ice, taking care to target as far away as possible from his body. Knowing Minerva was the only one left in the school with Dumbledore gone that could possibly teach them the Revelio charm, Jacob's sibling turned to her to learn the spell. At first, Minerva was baffled due to how advanced the charm was, but ultimately agreed to help teach them if they proved themselves sufficiently adept, impressed by their desire to help Hogwarts and study Transfiguration. Finding their abilities to have reached the level required in the class, Minerva called them to have their private lesson, and after Jacob's sibling successfully learned Revelio, Minerva congratulated them and noted the usefulness of the spell. After learning that Bill Weasley had taught Jacob's sibling the fire-making spell, Minerva was furious and scolded him heavily. Protecting the Philosopher's Stone. In 1991, friend of Albus Dumbledore, Nicholas Flamel, had the Philosopher's Stone that was keeping him alive moved from his safe in Gringotts to Hogwarts for safekeeping. Minerva contributed to the defenses set up around the magical artifact by transfiguring an enormous chess set and animating it to behave as a normal wizard's chess set would. As part of its protection duty, it required that the person or persons seeking to get past would have to take the place of a piece on the board and play an actual game of wizard's chess at great physical risk to themselves. The larger-than-life version of wizard's chess was known to be brutally violent and sacrificial for wizards to have to take part in themselves. Also in this year, Harry Potter, whom Minerva had been watching over for many years, would start his first year of education at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, not knowing this as he did not know that he was a wizard. Once Harry eventually arrived at Hogwarts, after the delivery of many acceptance letters, Harry was sorted into the House of Gryffindor. Harry was therefore again placed under the watchful eye and care of McGonagall. Though Minerva often maintained her strict persona in regards to the boy, she wasn't above bending the rules for him on occasion, such as when she caught him flying on a broomstick without proper supervision. Instead of expelling him, which was Madame Hooch's stated punishment for anyone caught doing so, Minerva instead took him to see Oliver Wood, captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, to comment on his prodigious skill with the broom. Harry made the team, remarkable for a first year, and became the youngest seeker in a century. She made arrangements for Harry to have a Nimbus 2000, the fastest broomstick of the time, for use during games and practices. However, several incidents marred the year. At Halloween, the festive feast was interrupted by the arrival of Professor Quirrell, who came charging in screaming about a troll loose in the dungeons before fainting dead away. After restoring calm, Dumbledore ordered all students to return to their dormitories while he and the teachers made their way up to the dungeons. The troll was not there upon their entry, but a terrible racket from an upper floor provided a clue. Upon reaching the site, Minerva was shocked to discover a wrecked bathroom, an unconscious troll, and 3 bedraggled first years, one of whom was her best student, Hermione Granger. To her further shock, Hermione claimed that she had gone looking for the troll thinking she could handle it, but most assuredly would have been killed had Harry and Ron not found her. Torn between anger and pride, Minerva took 5 points from Hermione but awarded 5 each to Harry and Ron for, as she put it, sheer dumb luck. Over the Christmas period, she attended the Christmas feast and received a kiss on the cheek from a very drunk Hagrid. Rather than admonish him, she instead giggled while blushing red in the face. However, her serious side appeared when she caught Draco Malfoy roaming the school at night. Dragging him by the ear, she sentenced him to detention and deduced 20 points from Slytherin when he claimed that Harry was also out of bed with an illegal baby dragon. Though the dragon in question was successfully released, Harry, Hermione, and Neville were all caught and brought before McGonagall by Filch. Mad and disappointed with them, she told them all off before punishing them severely. A loss of 50 points each, 150 in total, and detention with Malfoy. This caused Gryffindor to drop to last in the House Cup. Towards the end of the year, McGonagall and the other teachers' protective enchantments down in the Philosopher's Stone chambers would come to test when Quirrell attempted to steal the Philosopher's Stone. Also testing and facing the enchantments were Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley. The trio was successful in stopping the stone being stolen at the end of the school year. Gryffindor had won the House Cup after receiving the most house points that year, after getting bonus points for the trios and Neville Longbottom's bravery. Thus, for the first time in years, McGonagall's house was the current House Cup champions. Her reaction wasn't documented, but it's assumed that she was pleased with their efforts, as Professor Snape shook her hand with a very forced look of congratulations. The second opening of the Chamber of Secrets. In the beginning of the 1992 school term, Minerva had to deal with Harry and Ron, who crashed Mr. Weasley's flying Ford Anglia into the Whomping Willow, due to the barrier at platform 9 3/4 being sealed by Dobby so the two couldn't board the train. This nearly exposed the wizarding world to muggles, but Minerva was fairer than Snape, the one who brought the matter up in the first place. Minerva ultimately let them off with a mere detention and letters to their families. Also, she didn't take any house points, as Harry pointed out that the term had not yet started when they took the car, which she confirmed and almost smiled at this remark. Later, Minerva was present for the reopening of the Chamber of Secrets. She, along with the rest of the teaching staff, scoured the castle for the chamber, but to no avail. Minerva was worried over messages left on the walls and was at a loss about what should be done. She also had to deal with the less than helpful Gilderoy Lockhart, who had been hired for the position of defense against the dark arts professor. McGonagall had little liking or use for the man, and by the end of the year was the only one of the many staff members who utterly despised him. For example, when he decorated the Great Hall in nauseatingly lurid pink hearts for Valentine's Day, she was observed to have a muscle twitching noticeably in her face. Throughout the year, two of Minerva's students, Hermione Granger and Colin Creevey, were petrified, along with the house ghost, nearly headless Nick. In the final weeks of that school year, Minerva served as temporary headmistress of Hogwarts after the Board of Governors, under Lucius Malfoy's influence, suspended Dumbledore for failing to stop the attacks against their students. She was also quite shaken and softened up, as when Harry and Ron tried to sneak off to investigate the matter but were caught by herself, she let them off under the belief that they were merely trying to visit a petrified Hermione, though she normally would punish them with detention. When Ginny Weasley was later taken into the Chamber of Secrets, where her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever, Minerva despairingly believed that they were facing the end of Hogwarts. Her temperament was not improved by the arrival of the hated Gilderoy Lockhart, who was completely oblivious to the worry of his fellow staff members, and immediately joined Professors Snape, Flitwick, and Sprout in forcing him into a corner by recalling all of his boasts that he could deal with the monster easily. With him dealt with, as they couldn't care less if he succeeded or failed, the staff turned their attention to the thing that they thought would never happen, the permanent closure of Hogwarts. Thankfully, this terrible reality never came to pass. While McGonagall received Ginny's distraught parents in her office, along with a returned Albus Dumbledore, she was astonished to see Ginny herself walk in, accompanied by a slime-covered Harry, Ron, and Lockhart, the ragged old Sorting Hat, Dumbledore's pet Phoenix, and the silver sword of Godric Gryffindor. Harry then explained that he and Ron had gone into the chamber to find Ginny, having realized the mystery and had slayed the monster within. Dumbledore then declared the crisis over and sent Minerva down to the kitchens to organize a celebratory feast, which she subsequently attended with great joy as the monster was dead and Lockhart banished. Escape of Sirius Black. The summer of 1993 also saw the escape of Sirius Black from Azkaban. When the school year began in September, Minerva had to deal with the effects that the Dementors had on her students, such as Harry Potter. She also authorized Hermione Granger to use a time turner in order to take extra classes. This year at Hogwarts would prove to be another difficult year, with Dementors guarding the castle, although they were forbidden from entering the grounds properly by Dumbledore. Minerva heartily approved of this, as she despised the foul creatures. At the start of the year, when McGonagall demonstrated her animagus form to her first class, she notes how quiet they were, as every class she demonstrated to it prior clapped. When Hermione explained about her first divination, McGonagall understood and asked her class which of them would be dying this year. Harry Potter raised his hand. McGonagall assured him that Sybil Trelawney's predictions were a way of greeting her class, and that no deaths of any students have occurred yet. To further put him at ease, she demonstrated one of her rare glimmerings of humor by stating that she still expected him to do his homework, but if he did die, then she would excuse his not handing it in. Throughout the year, Minerva assisted in guarding the school, yet nonetheless Black was able to infiltrate the castle. After Black had attacked the fat lady, McGonagall tried to tell Harry that Black was after him, but was cut off by Harry, who told her that Mr. Weasley had already told him before she could explain. Later in the year, Minerva was summoned to Gryffindor Tower when Ron Weasley claimed to have been attacked by Black. She initially dismissed him, as Black could not have possibly got in without the password, unaware that Hermione's cat, Crookshanks, befriended Sirius and gave him a discarded list of passwords, but was rendered speechless when the new guardian, Sir Cadogan, confirmed that he had indeed let him in because he had the passwords written down. When Neville Longbottom admitted to having written the passwords down, McGonagall banned him from future Hogsmeade visits for the rest of the year. When Harry received a firebolt following the destruction of his Nimbus 2000, McGonagall had it confiscated to be examined because she believed it to have been sent by Black. This incident caused Harry and Hermione to have a row because Hermione had alerted Minerva about the firebolt. It was returned to him later after having been declared safe. During the Quidditch match against Ravenclaw, Draco Malfoy, Gregory Goyle, Vincent Crabbe, and Marcus Flint posed as Dementors to sabotage Harry's performance, only to get struck down when Harry reflexively cast a Patronus charm at them. Utterly furious at this downright trickery, she deducted 50 points from Slytherin and put the quartet in detention. In the spring of 1994, though disgusted by the Slytherin Quidditch team's dirty tactics during the final Quidditch match after witnessing Draco Malfoy grab onto the end of Harry's firebolt to stop him from catching the snitch, which infuriated her to the point where she stopped telling Lee Jordan off and actually joined him in firing furious comments at Malfoy, she witnessed the Gryffindor Quidditch team win the Quidditch Cup for the first time since Charlie Weasley had played for the team during his Hogwarts education. McGonagall was delighted by Gryffindor's victory, openly sobbing. Later on in the year, 3 students from her house, Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger, would run into trouble when Sirius Black returned to Hogwarts. Triwizard Tournament. In the autumn of 1994, Hogwarts hosted the Magical Schools, the Beauxbatons Academy of Magic, and the Durmstrang Institute for the Triwizard Tournament. Harry Potter was selected as a Triwizard champion despite being underage, and McGonagall worried for his safety after having looked after him for so many years. Minerva pleaded with Dumbledore and Crouch to withdraw Harry from the tournament as it was highly dangerous, but withdrawing would go against the rules of the tournament and Potter had to continue on as there was a binding magical contract in place. During the year, Minerva more than once exhorted her students to provide a good appearance to their guests at the castle. She attended the Yule Ball with Albus Dumbledore and notably wore her hair down for the first time since Harry started his education at Hogwarts. While at the ball, Minerva danced with both Ludovic Bagman and Dumbledore, among others. Minerva loaned her classroom to Harry, Ron, and Hermione so they could practice spells for Harry's preparation for the 3rd task. She did this after having walked in on them practicing so many times around the school. At the end of the tournament, Minerva accompanied Dumbledore and Severus Snape in the rescue of Harry Potter from the Death Eater that had spent the entire school year impersonating the Auror Alastor Moody, that year's DADA professor. She was instructed to guard Crouch Jr. after he revealed his part in the rebirth of Voldemort, but was unable to prevent the Dementor brought by Minister Cornelius Fudge from giving the Death Eater the Dementor's kiss. She was intensely furious at Fudge for this blunder and severely shaken from having witnessed the unspeakably horrible act, screaming more than Harry had ever seen before. Thus, when the minister refused to believe Dumbledore and Harry Potter about the return of Voldemort, Minerva nonetheless stood in support of her superior and her student. In The Return of the Dark Lord, Hufflepuff student Cedric Diggory was carelessly murdered, and a memorial feast was held at the end of the school year. The Second Wizarding War had now begun, despite the Ministry trying to hush up any claims of this. Second Wizarding War, 1995 to 1998. Once the Second Wizarding War had begun, Minerva joined the Order of the Phoenix and spent much of the summer of 1995 doing work for the Order. She would come and go from 12 Grimmauld Place wearing a Muggle dress rather than her robes, which Harry thought made her look odd. Though these duties took up much of her time, Minerva would face even greater challenges at Hogwarts. Because Dumbledore was unable to find a new professor for defense against the dark arts, the Ministry of Magic appointed Dolores Umbridge, a senior ministry official and stout supporter of Fudge, to Hogwarts staff. Minerva saw this appointment as an affront to the school itself and did little to hide her disgust. High Inquisitor at Hogwarts. When Harry Potter crossed Umbridge, earning a detention in his first class with her, Minerva was sympathetic, but warned him that Umbridge was not to be trifled with, and that he should keep his head down. McGonagall did all she could to circumvent Umbridge's authority without risking her own security as deputy headmistress. Instead, she treated Umbridge with as little credence and respect as possible while Hogwarts was under investigation by the Ministry of Magic, and even gave Peeves tips on how to unscrew a chandelier when he was trying to cause havoc for Umbridge. McGonagall also managed to put aside her dislike of Professor Trelawney for a time in the face of Umbridge's persecution of Hogwarts inhabitants. It's shown that she brings Trelawney back to Hogwarts after Umbridge dismissed her. After Umbridge's appointment as High Inquisitor, Minerva was forced to endure the other woman's presence during her evaluation of Minerva's teaching. Minerva kept her temper under control, maintaining an icy exterior, and yet still unleashed a dry and pointed wit on Umbridge. The encounter did serve to cheer students like Ron Weasley, who heartily disliked Umbridge. Ron even expressed delight at the prospect of seeing Minerva's classes inspected, remarking that Umbridge won't know what's hit her. Still, darker times lay ahead. Despite Minerva's best efforts to thwart the Ministry's influence at Hogwarts, things continued to grow worse. After Harry's resistance group was discovered by Umbridge, Minerva was present in Dumbledore's office when Harry was brought in. Dumbledore managed to save Harry by taking credit for the student organization, which led to Fudge announcing his intention to arrest him and actually attempted to have him taken by force, sneering at the idea of Dumbledore taking on him and the others single-handed. Minerva, loyal to her mentor and friend, loudly declared that he wouldn't be single-handed, and actually made to draw her wand, fully prepared to duel the Minister of Magic himself. She only stood down on Dumbledore's direct orders, as Hogwarts would need her. After Dumbledore escaped arrest, Umbridge was appointed headmistress over Minerva, but had virtually no support. When Umbridge invaded the career advising of the fifth-year students, Minerva finally lost her temper. During Harry Potter's session, when Umbridge kept interrupting the conversation and declaring that Harry would never be an Auror at the Ministry, Minerva declared to Harry that she would help him in any way necessary to achieve his goal, even if it was the last thing she did. The atmosphere at Hogwarts continued to devolve under Umbridge's leadership. St. Mungo's Hospital. During the owl examinations, events came to a head. When Dolores Umbridge and several Aurors attempted to evict Hagrid from the grounds of Hogwarts, Minerva sought to intervene on behalf of her colleague. Charging out of the castle, she shouted at the Aurors to leave Hagrid alone. However, before she could even draw her wand, Minerva was promptly hit with 4 stunning spells in the chest, which required that she be moved from Hogwarts Hospital Wing to St. Mungo's for treatment. Return to Hogwarts. Minerva didn't return to Hogwarts until after the Battle of the Department of Mysteries. After being released from the hospital, she required the aid of a walking stick for several days. Upon her return to the school, she promptly gave the 6 students involved in the battle at the Ministry 50 house points for alerting the world to the return of you-know-who, in response to Snape needling Harry about Gryffindor having 0 house points. 1996 to 1997 school year. Having resumed her duties within the Order of the Phoenix, as well as her other responsibilities at school when the new school year began after summer, early in the term, Minerva was responsible for the distribution of schedules among the 6th year Newt students. Minerva was present after Katie Bell was cursed by the opal necklace. After Harry ran off to find someone to aid Katie, he bumped into Hagrid and led him back to the group. After learning the nature of the event, Hagrid carried Katie to the castle, accompanied by Harry, Hermione, Ron, and Leanne. While in the castle, Minerva appeared and asked Harry what he was holding in his hand. It was the necklace wrapped in a scarf. She then proceeded to hand over the necklace to Professor Snape. Harry told her his theory is that it was Draco Malfoy that gave Katie the necklace, but she scorned the theory and dismissed them. Snape was able to stop the curse from spreading any further, but Katie was taken to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, where she spent much of that year recovering from the effects of the curse. Battle of the Astronomy Tower. On June 30th, 1997, Minerva and the other teachers were informed by Dumbledore that he would be leaving the school for a few hours, and instructed them to patrol the corridors as a safety precaution, and that they would be joined by Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, and Bill Weasley. Mindful of the stringent security measures that had been put in place in light of the return of Lord Voldemort, it seemed impossible that any intruder could bypass the protective enchantment surrounding the school, and indeed, even as she began with her sentry duty, nothing seemed amiss until the sudden arrival of Ron, Ginny, and Neville near midnight, who explained that they had just come from the 7th floor corridor, where a number of unknown individuals had just emerged from the room of requirement, hidden under the cover of Peruvian instant darkness powder. Within minutes of this happening, Minerva, Phileas Flitwick, and the 2 trios of students and Order members discovered that group of no less than 6 Death Eaters heading in the direction of the Astronomy Tower, and having immediately chased and thereby forced them to scatter, they were all quickly engaged in a fierce skirmish to try and stop the trespassers. Seeing the need for more wands on their side, Minerva sent Flitwick to get Severus Snape so he could help fend off the intruders. At the time of Dumbledore's murder, Minerva and the rest of Hogwarts was stuck on the level below them, having been prevented from passing to the stairs to reach them by a cursed barrier set by the Death Eaters. When he arrived, Snape, by contrast, could, as he had the Dark Mark, and pushed past her. Having merely assumed that her colleague was simply in a hurry to pursue their adversaries, no one tried to stop him as he did so. Once the intruders escaped from the scene of the crime, however, Minerva was devastated to find their esteemed headmaster, a man whom she had known nearly her entire life as a teacher, mentor, and friend, lying dead outside on the lawn beneath the Astronomy Tower, and asked Hagrid to move the body. The death of Albus Dumbledore. Minerva regrouped with the rest of the other combatants at the hospital wing, where they discussed what had transpired, and Harry Potter elaborated on the plot to assassinate Albus Dumbledore. Upon learning from Hagrid that Horace Slughorn had notified the Ministry of Magic, Minerva promptly and prudently assumed the role of acting headmistress of Hogwarts, by having the heads of house meet with her in what would now become her new office in the head teacher's tower, to discuss the future of the school. Before they arrived, she also tried to comfort Harry about the death of Dumbledore, as well as to persuade Harry to confide in her the truth about what he and the late headmaster had been up to prior to their sudden departure from the school, only for Harry to refuse, as Dumbledore had shared the facts of the matter in the strictest of confidence. 1997 to 1998 school year. As the war continued, Minerva remained at Hogwarts, even when it was taken over by Voldemort. This was most likely to try and make sure that as little harm came to her students as possible, and because she could act as an insider so that the Order of the Phoenix was informed on what was going on at the school. Even when Severus was appointed headmaster and Alecto and Amycus Carrow were given free reign in the school, Minerva did as much as she could to protect the students. The Rebel Alliance, Dumbledore's army, founded by the students, reformed, and McGonagall helped to keep their meetings a secret. Battle of Hogwarts. On May 1st, 1998, Minerva was present when Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley returned to Hogwarts in the middle of the night in search of Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem. Realizing that a battle was upon them, Minerva engaged Severus Snape, the headmaster at the time, in a fierce duel. While Snape did put up a good defense, McGonagall gained the upper hand in the duel quickly, and when Phileas Flitwick and Pomona Sprout arrived, Snape fled, now severely outnumbered. Minerva, believing his escape was motivated by fear, called him a coward as he fled the school. Harry informed McGonagall of a quest that Dumbledore had left him. In respect for Dumbledore's wishes, she offered to hold Voldemort and his army back whilst Harry fulfilled this quest. She then proceeded to lead the defense of Hogwarts against the Death Eaters with Kingsley Shacklebolt, personally animating virtually all of the castle's suits of armor and statues to help her defend the school. Shortly before the battle, Minerva ordered Neville Longbottom, with the aid of Seamus Finnegan and other students, to destroy the wooden bridge so that the Snatchers could not sneak onto school grounds. To ensure the advantage of chaos was on their side, she also ordered Argus Filch to find Peeves and bring him to her, which he did in response to her agitation. After ordering the evacuation of younger students through the Hogshead, Minerva began to help fortify the castle against the coming attack, with the assistance of her fellow teachers, order members, and even the older students who had stayed behind to fight. When Pansy Parkinson suggests that they take the deal offered to them by Voldemort, that of their lives in exchange for Harry Potter, Minerva ordered the cowardly girl and all those not willing to fight to leave. She stood defiant in the lull and among many students in a crowd when Voldemort himself walked into the Hogwarts grounds. It was only when she saw Harry Potter's body being carried by Hagrid that she began to despair, letting out a scream terrible to anyone who heard it, equal to that of Ron, Hermione, and Ginny's together. Nonetheless, in the final moments of the battle, she dueled Voldemort himself to a stalemate along with Horace Slughorn and Kingsley Shacklebolt. They were blasted aside by his fury when Bellatrix Lestrange was killed in a duel with Molly Weasley. McGonagall was also present when Harry and Voldemort dueled for the final time. She and many others witnessed Voldemort's killing curse connect with Harry's disarming charm. Voldemort's curse was rebounded, signaling his final defeat at Harry's hands. She, along with everyone else in the Great Hall, hugged Harry in an uncharacteristic display of great emotion, being one of the first to reach Harry after Hermione, Ron, and Ginny. This event signaled the end of the Second Wizarding War. Early career as Headmistress of Hogwarts, 1998 to 2003. Having been duly awarded the Order of Merlin First Class by Minister for Magic Kingsley Shacklebolt for her unwavering allegiance to the Order of the Phoenix during the historic conflict, Minerva was eventually immortalized on a chocolate frog card, an accolade she later admitted she had never imagined receiving. And 4 months later, by the time the damages done to the castle during the battle had been repaired and the protective enchantments around it restored, she had been officially appointed to the position of Headmistress by the Hogwarts Board of Governors. Upon assuming her new post full-time, she was advised not to confuse the headmaster portraits for the actual people they depicted, as they were only paint and memory, and supposed to be nothing more than a support mechanism for the many difficult decisions that she would now have to make while running the prestigious institution. Ultimately, the faculty was ready to accept a new batch of first years for the 1998-1999 school year on the 1st of September. During this term, the school also guided those who would have otherwise completed their studies had it not been for the Magic is Might campaign of Lord Voldemort and his followers, such as Muggleborns like Hermione Granger, in finishing their newts. Around this time, following a private conversation with Harry Potter, the new headmistress, in view of the revelation of his true intentions and motives, made the somewhat controversial decision to add Professor Snape's portrait to the gallery in her office, in commemoration of his true allegiance and the role he had played in the Second Wizarding War. In the time that followed, Minerva oversaw a very trying time for the rest of the denizens of Hogwarts Castle, as the final battle had left marks both seen and unseen upon the school. The castle, for instance, though rebuilt, still bore scars decades later, and for years after the Dark Lord's last stand, nearly all of the students were able to see the thestrals that pulled the Hogwarts carriages, serving as a constant, painful reminder of the cost of said event. On the anniversary of the Battle of Hogwarts, Minerva would also host memorials at the school, at least one of which involved those in attendance being treated to several expert demonstrations of the shield charm. Having also lost members of staff during the battle, she was also involved with the hiring of new members of school faculty, in addition to finding a suitable candidate to replace her as the school's Transfiguration teacher, as well as a new permanent occupant for the post of Defense Against the Dark Arts instructor. She was also behind the eventual employment of her former student Neville Longbottom to the Herbology department, under head of department Pomona Sprout, whom she eventually appointed as her successor as the head of Gryffindor House. Having evidently decided to be somewhat more directly involved with the student body than Professor Dumbledore had been in his day, rather than delegating the task to another staff member, Headmistress McGonagall was also known to have continued to personally attend to some of the duties she had carried out on Dumbledore's behalf throughout her time as deputy headmistress, including sending letters of acceptance to children that had been selected by the Book of Admittance that were approaching their 11th birthdays, collecting the new first years, escorting them to the Great Hall, and presiding over the sorting ceremony. Minerva ultimately earned recognition as a very successful and inspirational headmistress of the school, and when she took up permanent residence in Dumbledore's old quarters, her new study became the home to, among other things, a self-playing harp whose tones could often be heard around midday between classes. She also became part of the long line of headmasters and headmistresses that made use of the Hogwarts pensive, and who sought to contribute to the success of her eventual successors in office by adding to the invaluable library of reference at her disposal by leaving behind some of her own experience in the form of memories. 2001-2002 school year. One Hogwarts tradition that dated back for hundreds of years was the spirited competition between their own school and some of the other prestigious wizarding institutions around the world. Students that were of age from each school got the opportunity to meet and test their mettle in the field of potion making against their peers from the Russian School of Magic, Koldovstorets, Mahutokoro in Japan, and the Ugandan institution of Uagadu. As incumbent head of Hogwarts, Minerva readily picked up where Dumbledore had left off in doing her part to keep the tradition alive. And during the 2001-2002 school year, Hogwarts partook in the 86th Wizarding Schools Potions Championship. 2002-2003 school year. 5 years after the final battle, Minerva also wrote a glowing letter of recommendation to the Ministry of Magic's research wing regarding one of their graduating students. Having achieved no less than 5 outstandings and 1 exceeds expectations on his newts, Grim Folly had been one of the students that were bereft by the Dark Lord's second rise to power, having lost both of his parents to the Death Eaters during the conflict. Still, he had remained an outstanding student that embodied all of the qualities that marked a true Hufflepuff, and given his perseverance and impressive record, Minerva was happy to help him land a job at the Ministry, where he was later taken on by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement as a research assistant at the Auror office. The New Generation, 2008 through 2015. At some point in 2008, 10 years after the Battle of Hogwarts took place, Minerva gave Hermione Granger, who had since joined the Ministry and risen to a high-placed office in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, permission for Dumbledore's old notes on the tales of Beedle the Bard to be published as part of her new translation of the book. Sometime before September 1st that same year, Headmistress McGonagall charged Rubus Hagrid with serving as a special messenger to the family of a young Muggle-born that had been admitted to the school, in order to explain to the child's parents about the existence of magic, to deliver their letter of acceptance, and to take the said student-to-be to Diagon Alley in London to purchase the necessary school supplies. 2008-2009 school year. Shortly before the annual start-of-term feast, Headmistress McGonagall was informed by Mr. Filch that a rather temperamental ghoul had found its way into an empty classroom on the 3rd floor, a notice she passed on to the student body upon their arrival with the instruction to stay clear of said area until the creature had been dealt with. Having continued to collect the new batch of first years escorted by Professor Hagrid instead of delegating that task, Professor McGonagall brought the aforementioned Muggleborn and the rest of the new students to the Great Hall for the start-of-term feast. Addressing the students, she held a brief speech about the importance of unity in spite of their individual differences, citing their victory at the Battle of Hogwarts as a prime example of what the castle's residents may accomplish when they work together, and put nervous students at ease by reminding them that even the famous Harry Potter had once stood where they did, having both started out as a student like themselves and looked just as nervous. When the time came for the annual sorting ceremony, however, which saw the sorting of, among others, Kevin Farrell, Robin Thistlethwaite, Cassandra Vole, Fisher and Colby Frey, Danielle Page, and Lottie Turner into their respective houses, when the time came for the last of the newcomers on the list to come up and try the sorting hat, the headmistress was surprised to find that they were one short. Fortunately, Professor Hagrid had found her and brought her forward, explaining that she had been distracted by some of the bushes outside the castle. After issuing the dawdler a gentle rebuke for her tardiness, and had her sorted as well, Minerva advised the rest of the student body to enjoy the feast while they still could, as they would need to be well rested before starting the new term. The woes of the Warringtons. The following evening, Professor McGonagall learned that Ivy Warrington had wandered off once more, and what was more, this time had been missing for long enough that there was actually cause for alarm. Having gone to have a look for her herself, the headmistress eventually came across a small group of her classmates late into the evening in the grand staircase, whom she questioned about their classmates' whereabouts. Upon realizing that they did not know either, Minerva tasked Hagrid with organizing a search party, and turned down her peers' offer to lend them a hand. While Ivy was noted to have not yet turned up the following day, the missing pupil was eventually found that evening by her schoolmates, who had decided to organize a search party of their own. While the staff and students alike were happy to see her return safe and sound, this was by no means the end of Ivy's aberrant conduct. Shortly afterwards, Professor Longbottom had caught her dueling in the corridors with one of her classmates, Cassandra Vole, on which occasion she had surprised everyone present by successfully casting a highly advanced vanishing spell and ended up dematerializing a suit of armor instead. This was made more concerning than it was impressive by the fact that only a stroke of good fortune and poor aim was to thank for Miss Vole's continued existence. However, while Ivy and her friends had been put in detention and told to think about the implications of using such a dangerous spell against a peer, when questioned about it, Ivy had confessed to have no memory of how she learned it. Upon learning this, and presumably also about Ivy's rumored involvement and guilt in the matter of the disappearance of her twin sister, which had been publicized, gossiped about, and become common knowledge outside of the school, the headmistress contacted the Ministry of Magic to make some inquiries on the matter. Having been informed that while Winifred Warrington had indeed vanished shortly before Ivy arrived at the school, the incident had been ruled an accident, and that ministry officials had even assisted the family in trying to get her back. With this in mind, and in view of Ivy's recent disappearance, Minerva still reached out to the Warringtons to keep Ivy's family informed about the situation, at which point she got in touch with Ivy's grandmother, whom the headmistress eventually invited to the school in hopes that she could help shed light on Ivy's erratic behavior and apparent memory loss. As it happened, Miss Warrington's visit also coincided with yet another nightly wandering through the castle on the part of Ivy and her friends. And when the caretaker came to drop the students in question off after he found them exiting the very place the former had gone to when she went missing, the headmistress asked them to explain themselves. She then learned that Ivy's journey was one of self-discovery. It began when she and her friends had asked themselves how Ivy could have even known about, let alone learned to cast a vanishing spell against Cassandra Vole, without remembering how, why, or even when she learned it, and ended with a frightening encounter with her own worst fears in the Room of Requirement. This venture, which included new friends, unlikely destinations like the tower housing the ancient Book of Admittance, and even an unscheduled visit to Minerva's own office in order to borrow the pensive to review a memory found in Ivy's locket they had correctly deduced pertained to Winifred's disappearance, answered many important questions. After the students had given their side, however, Minerva pointed out that there were certain key points that appeared to be missing from their story, and announced the presence of Ivy's grandmother, whom she was confident would be able to fill in the rest of the gaps. When Mrs. Warrington explained how Winifred, whose magic would sometimes manifest itself in unpredictable, dangerous ways, had been held back by their father for fear that she might hurt someone if she was allowed to attend school before she learned how to control her magic, and accidentally made herself disappear in a failed attempt at vanishing Ivy's trunk so as to stop her from leaving Hogwarts without her. Having found Ivy in a desperate state of panic and in more pain than she could bear to see her grandchild in, Miss Warrington had tried to modify her memories of the event in order to make her forget what happened. The memory charm had been too strong, and it inadvertently erased not only the accident, but all of Ivy's memories of her sister, all the while failing to erase her entirely, thus accounting for her tendency to wander off with a vague notion of looking for something. Having recognized what a precarious situation Ivy had been in, as well as being sympathetic to the difficult position that their grandmother had been in, the headmistress commended the old witch for her good intention and assured her that in spite of everything, Ivy had grown tremendously over the course of her first year, and voiced the belief that she and the friends she made had a bright future ahead. The 2009-2010 school year. At some point before the new term, Headmistress McGonagall got in contact with a worldly traveler with a proclaimed interest in bygone times, named Jacob Gorski, and invited him to join the staff for the duration of their new term as a visiting professor of history of magic. He was also known to have kept a lemur called Bly, which acted as his assistant. As part of his curriculum, Professor Gorski had the students search for clues to magical secrets within Hogwarts Castle, an assignment Minerva would later discover had been more than it seemed, with his course aims and lesson plan having been little more than a means to an end. On the 1st of September 2009, among the new group of students who arrived at the castle to start their magical education, Edward Lupin was there, a young man who, like Grim Folly, had lost his parents to the Death Eaters. The son of the fallen war heroes and one-time friends, allies, and fellow members of Minerva's in the Order of the Phoenix, Remus and Nymphadora Lupin, he was sorted into Hufflepuff. Later that term, Minerva visited the Hogshead Inn during a Hogsmeade weekend trip and discovered that several second-year students, coincidentally the very same friend group that she had summoned to her office near the end of the previous year, had snuck out of the school without permission and visited the village despite the fact that they were not old enough to partake in said trips. Having caught them red-handed, the headmistress brought them all back to the castle and asked them to explain themselves, though their reason for being there was not one of ill intent, as they had been assigned some homework by Professor Gorski that required them to discover a secret at the school with historical historical significance, which in turn had led to their pursuit of a map that was believed to lead to a hidden treasure by following the leads given to them by various portraits. Their most disconcerting revelation, however, was also the one that Professor McGonagall had the most difficulty believing. Apparently, their visiting professor appeared to be spying on them, and right before she had showed up at the inn where she'd found them, they had seen him consorting with a cloaked wizard, to whom he had seemingly sold a basilisk fang. As they had no evidence for this, however, and had knowingly broken school rules, she put them all in detention. The secret intruder. Shortly afterwards, however, the headmistress received word from the Ministry of Magic that confirmed there was actually something to their accusations. Gorski, who had spent some time traveling the world hunting for treasure and riches before he was invited to teach at Hogwarts, had eventually partnered up with a dangerous dark wizard. Having been on the case and monitored Jacob Gorski's movements closely for several months in order to ferret out the evildoer, Minerva was informed that Ministry agents would arrive before long to secure the castle. When she realized that Gorski had endangered the school by smuggling a dangerous lawbreaker in, the headmistress rushed to find him in order to apprehend and question him. Already incapacitated and surrounded by the very students who had tried to warn her about him in the first place, Minerva was able to discern that Gorski, rather than the willing accomplice he was thought to have been, was instead being controlled by means of the Imperious Curse. When she learned from the students present that the wizard responsible was running loose somewhere on the premises, Minerva ordered the students back to their dormitories and told them to leave the dark wizard in question to the teachers and ministry officials. Although Professor McGonagall would later discover that the students had disobeyed her, as the students had instead taken it upon themselves to find the artifact Bly had been searching for before he did, considering the violent confrontation that followed resulted in the capture of said intruder and no one was seriously harmed, the headmistress did not mete out any severe punishment for the transgression. After his capture, Professor Gorski was freed from Bly's control. During the same school year, Hogwarts was represented in the 87th Wizarding Schools Potions Championship. Christmas at Hogwarts. During Christmas later that term, Minerva was approached by Daniel Page, who explained that Ivy, whose memories had since been mostly restored, was not feeling the holiday spirit as she was missing her sister too much, and that he had come up with the idea that Ivy might feel more connected to Winifred if she had a present for her and vanished it, hopefully sending it to wherever Winifred was. The headmistress, although aware that this was not how vanishing spells worked, could still appreciate it as a symbolic gesture, and retrieved one memory from each of Ivy's friends about when they first met Ivy, which were then gift wrapped and handed to her so that they could be sent to Winifred. 2015-2016 school year. Having appointed Teddy Lupin the new head boy over the summer holidays leading up to his 7th and final year at the school, Minerva greeted the students for the new term, which at its conclusion would see the departure of said student, and at its beginning saw the arrival of, among others, young James Potter, the oldest son of Harry and Ginny. During the sorting ceremony, he was, to no one's surprise, sorted into Gryffindor. During the same school year, Hogwarts was once again represented in the Enchanted Garden at the 88th Wizarding Schools Potions Championship. 2017-2018 school year, ready to welcome a new batch of first-year students on the 1st of September 2017 for the new term. Once the new students had been picked up at the Hogsmeade station, ferried back across the Black Lake, and escorted up the castle, they were shown to the Great Hall to partake in the customary sorting ceremony, overseen by Minerva herself. Embarking on their magical educations that year were the sons of the alumni Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy, Albus and Scorpius. During said event, the latter was, to no one's surprise, placed in Slytherin House, as his ancestors before him, but so was, to the shock of everyone in attendance, Albus. Assisting the SOS Task Force, 2018-2021. By the 14th of December 2018, the world wizarding community had been dealt a devastating blow, following the sudden outbreak of a chaotic piece of magic that caused numerous unpredictable traces of magical activity to suddenly appear all over the Muggle world, thus threatening the potential exposure of the magical world. During the Ministry's investigation into the cause of the calamity, when it was agreed by his former co-workers that Grim Folly had both the means, motives, and opportunity to bring about said catastrophe, Minerva provided the Calamity Management team with a copy of Grimm's school record and informed them about the tragic fate of his parents, as well as noting what an outstanding student he had been, and gave no indication that she believed in Grimm's guilt. After the International Confederation of Wizards and the Ministry of Magic in London partnered to create an international task force, whose sole purpose would be to investigate and contain the situation, several former members of the Order of the Phoenix, including Arthur Weasley, Aberforth Dumbledore, Hestia Jones, and Minerva herself, got personally involved to help with the agents. At one point, Minerva was called in as a guest lecturer to talk about the peculiarities of fighting curiosities, during which aspiring magi zoologists in attendance learned a lot and were able to use said knowledge to improve their defensive spell work. At a later date, she also invited some of its volunteers to Hogwarts in order to show them the original architect's blueprints for the castle to help them better understand the transformative powers of magic. Before long, Minerva would also assume a part-time role in the Calamity management team herself, where she was put in charge of overseeing those of the Calamity investigators wishing to pursue a career as a professor. She warned them of the difficulties they would have to face along the way, as well as the fact that they may be called upon to do things they never thought possible. She invited at least one such person to join the teaching staff at Hogwarts in time for the new term in order to get some experience educating young witches and wizards, and to learn practical skills that would help them better tackle the Calamity. Upon the arrival of a Calamity investigator to Hogwarts Castle to take up a teaching position, Professor McGonagall welcomed the individual by giving them a copy of the letters that were once exchanged between Albus Dumbledore and Adalbert Waffling to help improve their skills in addressing the Calamity, specifically in fighting impaired foes. Along with teaching them on the Deterioration Hex for purpose of weakening their foes, she also showed them how to draw on the strength of others when in combat, how to systematically work with academic research to improve their attention for detail, and how to augment the effects of the exceptionally powerful protection charm that they had previously been taught by Phileas Flitwick by adjusting their stance. During this time, she would also lecture them on how to better connect with their teammates, which helped them get better results with their proficiency charm. Determined to run the school as normally as they possibly could under the circumstances, despite the rising tension surrounding the Calamity, and even though Hogwarts was hit with a massive pixie infestation and required all the professors to spend time finding and removing nests, the Inter-House Quidditch Cup was held as planned. And at some point after the tryouts for the Gryffindor Quidditch team, Professor McGonagall announced to a gathering of students in the Great Hall that Rose Granger Weasley had made it as their new chaser. Despite the best efforts of everyone involved, however, it eventually became glaringly obvious that the security measures that had been put in place to ensure the safety of the school's residents were wholly insufficient to stop the Calamity from claiming victims from within the castle itself. At some point, students from all four houses were snatched and dislocated in the Muggle world. A number of items and special artifacts from Hogwarts, such as portraits, became foundables as well, along with several staff members, including Minerva herself. In the summer leading up to the new school year, the Ministry of Magic hosted a panel of luminaries that had all had pieces of their lives turned into foundables by the Calamity to share their experiences. Minerva, having accepted the invitation to partake as a panel speaker, joined Harry Potter and Ginny Weasley in talking openly and honestly about what they had gone through, which resulted in an enlightening and emotional evening from which the agents of the SOS Task Force would later be known to have benefited greatly from. 2019-2020 school year. Shortly before the beginning of the school year, Minerva was informed that a highly talented student in Slytherin House had decided to transfer to Beauxbaton's Academy of Magic to distance herself from the surges of chaotic magical activity that were running rampant in Britain, as she felt that the Calamity had singled out her house. Minerva tried to convince her to stay, but was ultimately unsuccessful. The headmistress took no small amount of pride in the fact that more than 74% of the volunteers that had taken time off of their busy schedules to assist the ministry by quill and parchment with the job of tracking, sorting, cataloging, collating, and archiving returned foundables for the ministry were current and former members of Hufflepuff House. Around the same time, Minerva also received owls from no less than 3 students in Ravenclaw House asking if they could receive their lesson plans early as to not fall behind in their studies, an exchange she noted it was not uncommon for her to have with students of that house at the beginning of each term. When the Hogwarts Express was whisked away by the Calamity just shortly prior to its scheduled departure on the 1st of September, however, she quickly solicited the assistance of a highly reputable member of the SOS Task Force that Hermione Granger had recommended, hoping that said individual could return the train in time for the new school year. In the meantime, due to the ongoing surge, a number of foundables materialized on school grounds, including werewolves and fire-breathing chickens, expressing the concern that lest the Calamity was dealt with, she would have to spend the whole term keeping first-year Gryffindors and Rubus Hagrid away from them. The Calamity investigator was eventually successful in returning the Hogwarts Express in time for the start of the term, much to the relief of Minerva, who pointed out that the time-honored tradition of riding the train to school was as much part of the Hogwarts experience as the sorting ceremony. She was also relieved to hear of the safe return of the trolley witch, who had been turned into a foundable at some point afterwards, retrieved by the aforementioned task force member, saying that the Hogwarts Express would not be the same without her and her sweets, noting that she could remember her working on the train even back when Minerva herself was a student, during which she was partial to her pumpkin pasties. This was not to say that her troubles were over, however, as the Calamity hit the school itself itself next, spiriting off with the Sorting Hat, a Thestral from Hogwarts Herd, one of their carriages, a boat, a winged boar statue, and even the sign directing people between Hogwarts Castle and Hogsmeade Village, all of which the same diligent individual was able to retrieve and return to their allotted places, much to the delight of the denizens of Hogwarts Castle. In the aftermath of the incident, the headmistress noted that in light of the fact that the school had suffered no lasting damage from this latest surge, not counting the students' new favorite excuse for not finishing their schoolwork in time, the calamity stole my homework, and that she would be writing to Minister Granger to inform her about the admirable service that the calamity investigators involved in putting down the new outbreak had done to the old school. On the 13th of February 2020, the Hogsmeade headmistress was dismayed to learn that not only had the seemingly quasi-sentient predicament that was wreaking havoc on magical communities everywhere hit her school once more, but that this time it gave the impression of having taken a particular interest in her personally, as it had snatched away several items of a significantly more private sort than the ones that had been claimed by the calamity so far. Mindful of the exemplary job that the Statute of Secrecy Task Force had done in ensuring that the new term could begin as planned 6 months earlier, Minerva had no qualms about reaching out to them again. Along on this endeavor was also a former student and then head of the task force, Constance Pickering, whose comments and constant questions about the various objects that they retrieved would eventually become irksome in the long run. The first possession to be returned was her self-playing harp, at which point Minerva showed signs of mild exasperation when she had to explain to Miss Pickering that the self-playing instrument had, as the name suggests, been bewitched to play itself. The next item on the list was the memory of a hornbill that she once owned, which she had then used as a teaching aid during her career as a Transfiguration professor, and remembered it fondly as a good bird, although she had not viewed it as a pet as she was more partial to cats. Other items on the list included a school crest, her Order of Merlin First Class, which she had framed and kept in her office, and an old photo of Dougal McGregor, about whom she refused to comment when Pickering asked about the man's identity, saying only that he was a man she once knew, and that was all she was prepared to say on the matter. By the 3rd of March, all the items had been successfully retrieved, and though grateful for their help, Minerva still lightly admonished Miss Pickering for prying into her personal life, reminding her that she did not have the right to the answer of every inquiry she could think of just because she asked. In spite of the fact that the security of the castle had been breached more than once as a result of the calamity, and having taken into account the prevailing theory that if enough people focused on something, it could affect how said phenomenon behave, the decision to permit the annual and always much anticipated Inter-House Quidditch League to go on as planned was not one Minerva made lightly. Having concluded, however, that the collective disappointment at its cancellation would be likely to trigger a new surge within Hogwarts. Because of this, the new season was held as normal. It was later noted that the Gryffindor Quidditch team had, despite some injuries on the part of the players, a fine showing that season, as had the Slytherin team, which the headmistress herself judged to have been deserving recognition of their successes. Having proceeded without incident for most of the duration, it was only as the final matches of the contest began that the calamity was drawn back to the Scottish Highlands, and whisked away, among with other things, the Hogwarts Quidditch Cup. Upon learning this, Professor McGonagall alerted the Ministry of Magic, which sent an agent from the Statute of Secrecy Task Force to recover them all. One of the foundables in question was an old Nimbus 2000, prompting a chaser on the Gryffindor Quidditch team to grow concerned that her broom, which was the same model, might vanish and be weakened if the same happened to hers, to which the headmistress assured her that the broom in question was almost certainly an echo of the one that once belonged to another famous student that played on their team years earlier. When the Gryffindor House ghost, Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington, was spirited away by the calamity along with the cup that turned him into a foundable, Minerva was delighted to see his safe return, stating that she had meant to ask his opinion on the calamity, seeing as he, being somewhat separated from his original self, just like the foundables were, perhaps had some interesting insights into the calamity they had not considered. As though the calamity was not bad enough, conceding with the ongoing catastrophe was also the discovery that various dark and magical creatures that had once allied themselves with the Dark Lord had began to behave rather conspicuously. As a staple in the magical community, Minerva was present at the extraordinary general meeting called at the Ministry of Magic by Minister Hermione Granger in the afternoon of the 1st of September 2020, where Harry Potter, now the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, talked about the movements and increased activity of Voldemort's former allies and cautioned vigilance regarding dark magic. Minerva also reported that when the staff returned to the school from the summer holidays, they had discovered that someone had taken boomslang skin and lacewing flies from the potion stores during the summer break, the ingredients for Polyjuice Potion. During the meeting, it was also revealed that Harry had begun to experience nightmares and pains in his scar, something that he had not experienced since his final defeat of Voldemort, which the former Dumbledore's army members were concerned might mean that some remnant of the Dark Lord may linger in some way. The meeting, however, ultimately descended into chaos and name-calling when Draco Draco Malfoy accused them of having invented the pain in Harry's scar as an attention-seeking publicity stunt, and stormed out in a huff on account of the Ministry's previous failure to issue a statement that denied the vicious rumors circulating about his family, which prompted people to leave without taking Harry sufficiently seriously either, and no strategy was agreed upon to tackle said possible threat. The 2020-2021 school year. When Albus Potter and Scorpius Malfoy did not arrive at Hogwarts with the Hogwarts Express, Minerva sent owls to their parents and later met with Harry Potter, Ginny Potter, and Draco Malfoy, along with Minister for Magic Hermione Granger and her husband Ron Weasley to find them. When she learned that Harry had felt pains in his scar and a dream of seeing Albus in the Forbidden Forest, Minerva, who was aware of the reliability of Harry's visions from personal experience, suggested that they take Professor Longbottom with them to look for the two boys, as his expertise in herbology could prove useful in the forest. Unbeknownst to the other involved parties, however, by the time the missing students were found, they had meddled in time and made it so that Ron and Hermione never married. Albus was sorted into Gryffindor, and Ron married Padma Patil, and Rose Granger Weasley had become unborn. Minerva, however, was still headmistress of Hogwarts in spite of their interference, and tried to advise Harry on interfering in Albus and Scorpius' friendship, but he insisted on keeping them separated, and even went so far as to threaten to come down to the school with the full force of the Ministry unless she complied, and insisted that the headmistress use the Marauders map to track their movements and keeping them apart. Minerva reluctantly agreed. Having half-heartedly carried out Harry's instruction and used the map a few times, she once purposefully ignored the two because they were under the invisibility cloak, and she felt justified in pretending she could not truly know if they were together lest she saw them. Shortly after, she received another visit from Harry, Ginny, and Draco. Upon seeing them, Minerva turned to Harry and informed him that come what may, she wanted no further part in ruining friendships, to which he apologized for the way he had spoken to her and advised that she use the map to find Albus and Scorpius that he can apologize to him too, having finally realized that he had been dangerously isolating his son by refusing to let him be with the only friend he had. Inclined to grant this request, Minerva used the map to discover that they were in the girls' bathroom on the first floor. Minerva and the parents tried to find them, but Moaning Myrtle revealed that they had gone beyond their reach by using a time turner to go back in time in order to save Cedric Diggory from death at the hands of Peter Pettigrew, much to Minerva's shock. Having been rather under the impression that every time turner in the Ministry's possession had been destroyed during the Battle of the Department of Mysteries 25 years earlier, Minerva was less than impressed to learn that the Ministry had confiscated an unregistered prototype for a new time turner during a raid on the home of Theodore Nott. Harry and Hermione, rather than destroying it, decided that it was a good idea to hold on to it, dangerous as it was. Seeing as the device could only take the boys through the temporal dimension while leaving the spatial one the same, the search for the two boys on the Hogwarts grounds continued in the present, as once they had finally returned to their own time, they would do so in the same geographical area as a matter of course. Having eventually found them on the edge of the Great Lake, the headmistress brought parents and children alike to her office. After the two young Slytherins confessed to what they had done, Minerva admonished not only the two young students for their serious lack of judgment, but their parents as well, reminding them that as noble as they had been in wanting to help Amos Diggory prevent the loss of his son, their meddling had returned them to the darkest times of the Wizarding War, and to never forget that the current peaceful world that they lived in had been created in part exactly because of the sacrifices made by those who had laid down their lives to fight for it. As punishment for their recklessness, she put them both in detention for the remainder of the year, placed them both on a blanket ban on all future Hogsmeade trips, and cancelled Christmas before telling them to find the time turner that Scorpius had found to be missing upon emerging from the lake when they returned in the original timeline. Having commenced their own search as well, the following day, Professor McGonagall was said to have been involved in negotiations with the local merpeople colony regarding the possibility of dredging the Great Lake in order to find the missing time turner. Not too long after these events transpired, however, Minerva received another urgent message from Harry Potter late one evening. Having had a dream about a visit to his parents' grave at St. Jerome's graveyard in Godric's Hollow with his Aunt Petunia that had never happened, and heard the Dark Lord's voice, as well as seeing his son Albus trying to desperately warn him that Lord Voldemort is still active, he had interpreted it as meaning that they were all in grave danger, and informed her that they would arrive shortly to check on Albus. Joining them in the Slytherin common room, they found the two friends left the dormitory and were missing once again, so she took with her fellow student Craig Boker Jr. to turn the school upside down to find them. Having subsequently split up in order to cover more ground in the search for Albus and Scorpius, when Minerva learned that the dead body of the aforementioned student had later been found on the Quidditch pitch, and what was more, bore unmistakable traces of the killing curse, Minerva took immediate action and alerted the Ministry. Coincidentally, it turned out that Harry, Hermione, Draco, and Ron, who had all gone to follow up on a lead regarding the kids' whereabouts, already had a suspect. Having left for the Ministry when she learned that Hermione Granger would be holding a second extraordinary general meeting, the headmistress was present when she announced to the world revealed not only Bowker's murder, but also about a recent search in Upper Flagley in Yorkshire. Having found a concealed room at St. Oswald's home for old witches and wizards whilst following up on a lead on the whereabouts of the missing children, the speakers declared that their investigation had unearthed two facts that had hitherto been unknown to Ministry records. There existed a prophecy that foretold the possible return of the Dark Lord, and the discovery that Lord Voldemort had turned out to have conceived an heir that was connected to and possibly destined to fulfill it. When Headmistress McGonagall inquired as to why the girl had not been taken into custody, Hermione admitted that Delphine, who had last been seen with the two missing boys near the Owlery by Professor Longbottom, and was the prime suspect in Craig Bowker's murder, had hidden herself in time through the use of the very time turner that Scorpius Malfoy had sworn he'd lost. While Minerva was not impressed with their failure to destroy said object, the meeting ended with a personal victory for Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and Draco when they all took the floor together and publicly united ranks in order to save their children. Shortly after said meeting, at which point the headmistress had returned to Hogwarts, it was discovered that Albus and Scorpius had cleverly devised a way to send a message to their parents in the present by leaving an inscription on Harry's old baby blanket, which they had treated with a potion that would only become visible when it interacted with another potion Albus had spilt on the blanket shortly before his final trip back through time. Now aware of when and where their children were, Harry, Ginny, Draco, Ron, and Hermione had gone back in time themselves and converged at Godric's Hollow in order to retrieve them, and hopefully to stop Delphine and her plot to thwart her father's final defeat. Minerva, though not present for the death-defying skirmish that took place at St. Jerome's Church, had previously declared her decision not to expel them for their misadventures through time, and would have been relieved to have Albus and Scorpius return to the school safe and sound following their return from the past, as well as pleased to hear that the one responsible for the murder of one of her students had been taken into custody and due to be locked up in Azkaban for her crimes. As it had been the case with Rowan Connor and Cedric Diggory, it can be assumed that a memorial ceremony was subsequently held in memory of Craig Bowker in the Great Hall. A calamitous warning. In late November the same year, the Ministry's internal calamity management team discovered the existence of a secret society known as the Unforgivable, as well as evidence that suggested that they'd been manipulating the calamity from the start. This was a feat that they had so far only thought that Grim Folly, who caused it, and Harry Potter, who helped spearhead the efforts to contain and understand it, were capable of, but was also believed to have been behind the disappearances of the London Five. Headmistress McGonagall, along with the rest of the Statute of Secrecy Task Force, subsequently received a letter about this from Constance Pickering, informing them of their suspicions about the Cabal, and instructed them to report any abnormalities they saw in the Calamity's behavior. Although the start of the following school term began as uneventfully as one could hope for under the circumstances, only 3 months passed before the school was to send word to Constance Pickering to inform her that a fifth surge had centered itself around Hogwarts. The surge, though its effects were notably less dire, nevertheless warranted remedying, as it had whisked away with a number of the painted likenesses and departed souls of some of Hogwarts' finest, most specifically the portraits of the 4 founders and the resident house ghosts. After the Statute of Secrecy Task Force successfully recovered that which had been lost to the first wave of the surge, the headmistress came across the ghost of Hufflepuff House, who explained how he had just conversed with Grim Folly, who had asked him to mind the portraits. Having scoured the castle without finding any signs of him, nor any other intruder, Minerva, upon seeing the fat friar remained adamant that the exchange had indeed taken place, nevertheless decided to increase patrols around the castle before she went to the Ministry of Magic. Upon arriving at their underground headquarters in London, Minerva found the Minister for Magic in the middle of overseeing the efforts that went into stamping the ongoing surge. Hermione, who had previously discovered that he had found a way to influence the calamity to the extent that he could actually modify its behavior and guide the focus of the surges, theorized that Grim Folly had created the surge and attached a false memory to the Fat Friar's Foundable as a way of trying to tell them something important, as he had communicated with them this way before. With that in mind, the headmistress returned to Hogwarts, but not before assuring her that she would be telling Sir Cadogan and the other portraits around the school to keep an eye out for anything out of the ordinary. Although 2 weeks would pass before the second wave of the surge came to pass, Headmistress McGonagall was still obliged to pay another visit to the Ministry when, on December 22nd, the spectral Knight of Gryffindor House was found in the Grand Staircase. He was instructed by Grim Folly to stand guard until he'd been found, suggesting that Folly was trying to tell them that something was hidden either in or behind one of the portraits. Hermione, who had never heard of such a thing happening before, questioned as to whether it was even possible for that to be the case, to which Minerva dryly remarked that if a lifetime of service to the ancient school had taught her anything at all, it was that anything was possible at Hogwarts. Sometime later, Headmistress McGonagall was made aware that her erstwhile student had reached out to one of the school's resident ghosts once more when a curious student in Ravenclaw House spotted the Grey Lady canvassing the Grand Staircase. case, and when they asked what she'd been up to, had been told that she was helping Grimm search before she left the area. Upon learning this, Minerva tried to track down and make further inquiries, only to discover that she had apparently gone missing as well. Minerva would later visit the Ministry to inform her colleagues on the new development. Later, the Ministry discovered a cryptic note written in Grimm's own handwriting, explaining that the person Grimm wanted them to find was waiting for them where the Prince of Enchanters was enthroned. By the time they had solved the riddle, however, Minerva had already sent an urgent owl to inform them all that Sir Nicholas had found two individuals trapped within the portrait of Merlin. The first was the Grey Lady, which explained her sudden disappearance. The second one, however, was, incredibly enough, none other than Kit Gerard, a former reporter for the Daily Prophet and one of the missing London Five. Following this, the headmistress gave a number of cursebreakers permission to enter school grounds, who were eventually able to free them both, the latter of which was transported to St. Mungo's. The Unforgivable. In late March of 2021, Minerva was once again contacted by Harry Potter, this time for the purpose of asking the headmistress for permission to station a party of Aurors at Hogwarts Castle for extra security. Having been locked in something of a cold war with the Unforgivable since they first learned of their activities, and actively sought to wrestle away the control of the Calamity, the new head of department had successfully intercepted the incoming surge and redirected it towards his secondhand memories of the Marauders, the repercussions of which had been what appeared to be a veiled threat that the Cabal planned to go after children as means of coercing them into ceasing their efforts to thwart them. Upon learning this, Minerva readily agreed to have the Dark Wizard Catchers help protect the school and put the staff on high alert. Each of their children was personally assigned an Auror to guard them, and Minerva would henceforth send a report back to the Ministry on a regular basis to inform them of the situation. At one point, Minerva's owl had been delayed by bad weather. Afraid that this might mean that something was amiss, the headmistress was startled when the recipient of her letters came bursting into her office, wand at the ready. She assured him that everything had been quiet, thus allowing Harry to rest easy and return to the Ministry to continue his work with the Statute of Secrecy Task Force. A Weasley Predicament. On April 2nd, the Calamity Management team was horrified to learn that their threat of teaching Harry a lesson they don't cover at Hogwarts had been deliberately misleading, and while the Ministry had been preoccupied securing the school, members of the Cabal had gone to Diagon Alley and with the help of Polyjuice Potion tried to get a jump on Ron and Ginny at work. Whilst the latter had been admitted to St. Mungo's to recuperate from her injuries, she had noticed that something was off and successfully driven away her assailant. Ron, on the other hand, had been caught off guard and abducted. Devastated to learn about their father's disappearance, Rose and Hugo were both racked with worry after they heard what had happened, and Minerva, in addition to having done what she could to help them through this trying time, also organized another search of the castle's portraits in the unlikely event that Ron would turn up in one, to no avail. Much to the relief of everyone involved, he was finally returned to them after the Unforgivable proposed to give them Ron in exchange for complete control of the Calamity. 2021-22 school year. Although Minerva played no significant part in the continued struggle against the Unforgivable by the Calamity Management team, the repercussions of this were still felt by the denizens by the fact of how some of the subsequent surges of the magical disturbance in question were carved from Harry Potter and Hermione Granger's memories of their time as students. By December 31st, 2021, however, the Cabal had been defeated, its infiltrators at the Ministry of Magic identified and apprehended, and the Calamity was slowly fading away, allowing life at Hogwarts to finally return to normal.
Did you enjoy our video? Well, then be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.